I'd been meaning to read Mörk Borg for a while. It made waves when it won 4 Ennies in 2020, and has since inspired a number of clones and parodies. Written by Pelle Nilsson, with art and design by Johan Nohr, the game advertises itself as a pitch-black apocalyptic fantasy RPG, a doom metal album of a game. But between its garish presentation and OSR lineage, I resisted reading the text for a while. My musical tastes are just about as far from metal as you can imagine, and I struggle with OSR games because I just don't click with a lot of their bare-bones rule sets. But as I flipped through the book over the holidays, it only took me till page 4 before I understood the game's appeal. While I think the text of Mörk Borg paints its apocalyptic setting perfectly well, I want to talk about how its layout is just as powerful in the ways in which it threatens readers to keep turning the page. So quickly, when I talk about layout, I'm talking about the ways in which the text and images of the game are arranged on its pages. In tabletop games, it's fairly common for books to adopt a 2-column per page layout, between 10 and 15 words per line, occasionally broken up by tables and pictures. Occasionally, a text will include an art spread that covers both pages, often to delineate chapters of a book. Finding the right way to fit your art and words together is, in my experience, a difficult, thankless task, which is why many designers hire layout artists to corral their prose into a legible shape. Side note, if you want to see some examples of the phenomenal layout artists in the indie scene, look no further than Caden Ramstack and Sin Posadas. These folks are absolute layout geniuses. In my own games, I prefer to take the Kingdom Hearts route and keep things simple and clean, but there's no better way to see how a text's layout can affect the tone of a game than by looking at Mörk Borg's actively antagonistic design. Let's start with the cover. Big black letters, scary skeleton man snarling as you gape at him on the shelves of your local game store. All to be expected from a metal-inspired text. But then why is the dominant color not the oppressive black you'd expect to see on a Tiamat album, but this horrible, blinding yellow? We get back into more familiar doom and gloom territory on pages 2 and 3. Dark silhouettes of churches, this big, swooping gothic font here on the right, vile crimes, alchemy of flesh, yeah, this all checks out. And then on page 4, what was written must be known, splashed across the page in hot pink, steamrolling these points of lore about the twin double-headed basilisks. The hell are we supposed to do with that? On the Dice Exploder podcast, Dan Phipps of Gen Room Games called Mörk Borg his favorite comedy game, and I think this splash of color really underscores this point. This game is both coming at you with its grimdark presentation and setting, and then constantly undercutting your expectations with its off-the-wall layout. I don't think Mörk Borg is being self-deprecating either. I think it's embodying the ethos of its OSR origins. On the RPG Bot podcast, Nohr explains that OSR games are not really supposed to be balanced. Challenges just sort of appear regardless of whether players are ready for them or not. You should never have a fair fight. Similarly, I think the game is challenging players with this antagonistic layout on purpose, daring them to navigate its shifting fonts and bright colors however they are able. Nohr stated in a Dicebreaker interview that, quote, "We wanted to see what would happen if we pushed the limits, if we broke all the rules, if we didn't hold back." And no one can accuse Mörk Borg of being too restrained. One user of the OSR subreddit described the game as being, quote, "derived from high school art class collages, an instant dumpster fire." In response, the designers asked if they could use the tirade as marketing material. Mörk Borg wants you to struggle, which makes sense in the context of an Eastern European apocalypse. The difficulty to make it through the text is a reflection of how hard your characters will fight just to see the light of another cold morning. Let's look at another example of the game presenting readers with a puzzle. Depending on which splash pages you come upon, it may appear that there's no discernible organization to the fonts and their layout at all, just a hodgepodge of looping Gothic among blocky letters. But I think that's part of the fun of reading this book, is that there is absolutely a method to this chaos. You just have to take a second to understand its structure. For example, I think pages 44 and 45 are maybe the most horrible spread I've ever seen. Your corneas are scorched with blinding yellow after flipping over from the previous spread, which is entirely black and white. The visual dissonance sends you reeling as soon as you turn the page. Much of page 44 is dominated by hot pink, which continues in slashes on the other side. All the while, the lines are all wrong. This D20 table for arcane catastrophes is teetering like a Jenga tower. Hell, there's a subtable for entry 19, perilously balanced atop entry 20. To say nothing of the fact that there's an entire rule just bent at a right angle at the top of the page. Absolutely disastrous, thoroughly unpleasant to read. And that's the point. These pages contain rules for what happens when you miscast a spell, a dangerous proposition in a low HP OSR game. There's even a taunting scribble at the bottom of page 44. You screwed up, and now you have to look at this nightmare page as punishment. When you look at this section in the context of a magical screw-up, it makes sense why the D20 table is wobbling, why there's text just pinging off the corners of the page. You should feel disoriented and sick, because that's exactly what you came to this table to do. Nohr wrote a thread about selecting typefaces and how each font conveys different meanings. Association. Basically gut feeling, but what do you think about when you see the typeface? Where does it take you? Does it fit the tone and style of the content you're working on, or will it clash? The same message set in different typefaces will communicate very different things. When you compare the big pink squiggles of page 44 to the angry scrawl scratched over it, what do you feel? I'm willing to bet that whatever you feel, it's not warm and fuzzy. This page is laid out intentionally, conveying a sense of unease not just with the words, but with how they're presented as well. My favorite bit of layout shenanigans, however, is another example of how, sometimes, the medium is more important than the message itself. Let's look at this D10 table from the bare bones edition of Mörk Borg, released in 2022 to make the game more accessible. It's a completely standard weapons table, right? Aside from the femur in the first entry, it all mostly makes sense. Weaker weapons in the 1 through 4 range, average weapons from 5 to 7, and great weapons with an 8+. Completely fine. How much space on the page would you reckon this table takes up in the original version? Half a page? The full page? It's 4. 4 pages for a D10 table of weapons. The sheer excess of this choice is hilarious. Mechanically, the information conveyed is the same, but you can't look at these spreads and say that they're identical to that stripped-down table. This is not to criticize accessible layout, obviously. Go watch my video on Patchwork World to hear why I actually prefer things to be basic. But it's just such a stunning difference in presentation that I can't help but ask, why? Because while, in gameplay terms, the tables act the same, I think the version with art is telling readers something very different. Look at the femur, for instance. Literally just a long bone, a scant outline drenched in black. Big blocky white letters announcing your shitty weapon to the world. Compared to the gory mess of its neighboring page, it's stark and bleak. Nilsson and Nohr are laughing at you, you absolute sucker, for getting the worst and grossest tool available. At least the short sword has a handle. Considering the next page, it's hard not to think of anatomical drawings. The Vitruvian Man comes to mind, or at least various pictures of medieval tortures. Perhaps the martyrdom of Saint Sebastian? Either way, this page is telling you that 1. Violence is inevitable, and 2. Bodies are fragile, no matter if you're shot with an arrow or bonked with a staff. And look at this man's face, his impassive expression while he's pierced, as if he expected this is how things would go, dying here alone, ass out. With this drawing, Mörk Borg is prepping you for combat, promising that the end result will be clumsy and red. By contrast, the final page is a trumpet blast, a shout of triumph. You won the jackpot and started the game with some of the best gear around. Just look at the way Zweihander is splashed across the page in big, bold letters. It's practically screaming, hey, this is the coolest shit you're gonna get. These weapons are so huge and stylized because they're a brief moment of celebration in an otherwise nightmarish setting. You might still get your face melted off as easily as the loser with the femur, but at least you looked like a badass the whole time. Ultimately, I'm always going to prefer a game's text over its art or layout, but I'm so pleased to have read Mörk Borg because it's a perfect example of how games can work outside convention and rules to convey a message beyond words on a page. From its harsh cover to disorienting composition, this game is one that tells the reader exactly what it's about. This convoluted dumpster fire is going to kill you, but if you have the patience to struggle against its antagonistic design, you'll discover that suffering is a game in and of itself. Hey everybody, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate folks who take the time to see what I'm saying about tabletop games. If you want to help me keep the channel going, you can send me a tip at my Ko-Fi in the video description. I'm trying to save up money to buy a new microphone. My background picture is Liquefied Image by Adrian on Unsplash, and my profile picture is by Eater Outsider on Tumblr. If you want to find more of my work, I'm at aavoy on Blue Sky, Monster Factory Fanfic on Tumblr, but my main site is aavoy.com, where I talk about games, writing, and health policy sometimes. I also do 2 podcasts. The first is Mortify the Friendship Quest, where me and my friend Layla do critical media analysis. We're just starting our new season with a conversation about Chicken Police Painted Red, a noir visual novel, which was weird and messy and kind of incredible. I'm really excited for y'all to hear that. And I do another show that's The Bible Boys, where me and my ex-evangelical friends, Michael and Josh, talk about Christian media. So if those things seem like something you might be interested in, please go ahead and check them out. Thanks again for watching, and until next time, see you around.